Welcome, everyone, to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the advertising manager, and I get to be your host today. We want to thank our sponsor, Rebecca Hebert, for celebrating the joy that those who teach fiber artistry bring to the world. And what a great statement. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We appreciate you sponsoring this episode of Textiles and Tea. We will take questions as always. They're the last 15 minutes of the program. Please put your questions in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, I don't always see those, but we love your comments. The comments in the chat are great. Today, we are with Felicia Lo. Now, Felicia is a designer and entrepreneur. She was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. Her lifelong passion for knitting, color, design led her to starting the SweetGeorgia as a blog in 2004. A year later, SweetGeorgia was founded on her dining room table with nothing more than 3 skeins of hand-dyed sock yarn for sale on Etsy. And it became the online store offering exquisite hand-dyed yarns and fibers that it is today. In 2017, she published her first book, Dying to Spin and Knit, with Interweave Press, and currently she is growing the School of SweetGeorgia, a learning community focused on makers interested in the textile arts and fiber crafts. Lo Meets Loom is a journal about her own weaving journey as it happens. When she's not playing with her circular sock knitting machine or weaving looms, she's on the mountain with her 2 children and her husband. Welcome, Felicia.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. And thank you, Rebecca, for sponsoring this. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we're going to start with the best question, which is, what is your favorite tea?
It's actually coffee. I don't really drink tea. But if it is tea, I would say Earl Grey with lavender is a good pick. I like that.
What kind of coffee then? Are you just a straight coffee drinker, or do you have to have all this good stuff?
Straight coffee. Straight coffee. Nothing fancy. It's really just very basic, but a lot of it, I think, is the goal.
More economical. There you go. So would you tell us how you got started in fibers?
Yeah. So looking back, I look at all of the things that I've done. You know, I knit, I spin, weave, dye, do all of these different textile arts. And then when I go back and I think about where did this actually all come from? And I think it was my very first impression, my strongest impression was watching my mom sew a dress when I was very, very young. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old at the time. And I remember living in our old house in Toronto, and the floor was carpet, and she was cutting this fuchsia, hot pink, magenta fabric on the floor of our house. And she was cutting all the pattern pieces out, and she sewed it together to make a dress. And I think watching her go through that process made me just awake to the idea that you can make anything and you don't necessarily need to buy everything. You can create something from scratch. And I don't think she realized, but at the time, like, I was so inspired. I was probably like maybe 6 years old at the time, and I snuck into the basement and I took her scrap fabric and I cut out pieces and made my own skirt. I used the sewing machine and I sewed my own skirt with an elastic waistband and all this stuff. I ended up breaking her sewing machine at that time, but I did manage to make this skirt. And I feel like that part of it really started this whole journey. And then, you know, being in the basement, I stumbled on her box of half-made knitted baby sweaters. She never finished these baby sweaters, but they were half knit. They were still on the needles. They were straight aluminum arrow needles. And so I took them and I started to also learn how to knit. And I taught myself how to knit probably in grade school as well. And so all of this kind of like snowballed. One thing led to the next thing, led to the next thing. I learned to crochet because I found some crochet hooks. And then my parents gave me a toy weaving loom, which I actually, because I keep it up in this attic here. But it's this weaving loom. If anybody recognizes this.
Oh, wow.
This is a Fisher-Price loom. Made in like the 80s, but it's basically like a rigid head of loom, and then you can like create a shed here. And so my daughter plays with it now as well. You can find these on eBay. They're like vintage weaving toy looms.
Oh, that's so cool. You still have it.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
My parents kept it. I mean, they kept everything.
That's great. Oh, well, I'm impressed that you taught yourself to knit just by looking at, I mean, it's one thing to, watch a video. When people say they teach themselves now, it's like, yeah, but you used a video. But if you just looked at it and learned how to knit, that's pretty impressive.
No, I think I looked at the fabric, but I did send away for one of those knitting booklets. It was a free knitting booklet that you got from Peyton's or Patton's yarn. And it just had those black and white illustrations for this is how you cast on, this is how you knit. Yeah, I think I just kind of followed all of those instructions and went from there. I think there was also a crochet book. That's kind of how I learned how to crochet too. And I mean, as a kid, I loved going to the library. So I would go to the library every week and I would go to the how-to section. I didn't read fiction really. I liked the how-to section. So I'd go there, get all the books. I was reading, Cave Facet books. I was bringing home all these books to learn knitting and color work knitting. And I didn't have a lot of materials, didn't have a lot of tools, but I just had a lot of interest.
You're a sponge. You just soak that up. Well, this is an image of some of your dyed fibers. So many of and one thing that's interesting is so many of our guests have a science background, and you do too. You studied to be a pharmacist. So do you think that science background impacted on your fiber career, like made you a better dyer because you understood the chemistry?
Absolutely. I think that there were, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's two parts of my pharmacy background, I think, that really, really helped me. Of course, the first part is like, I loved chemistry. I loved sort of learning about how all of those kinds of things worked, working in solution. I wasn't a very tidy person in the chemistry lab, but I enjoyed it and I like the theory behind it. And so learning how to dye and being really precise with measurements, with mixing dye stock solutions, all of that kind of stuff, I think really, really helped with the more like the steps, the procedure of actually dyeing. I also did graphic design. So I had a bit of a graphic design background. And so that sort of contributed to the color side of things. But the other part of my science education that I don't really talk about too much, but when I was in pharmacy school, I did a directed studies program with one of the university professors. And his thing was about trying to teach people the skills of working in the pharmacy lab through video and trying to do it online. And
Really? Way back when, huh?
way back when. And so
before we knew what was going to happen.
exactly. So like at that time, I was like learning how to use WebCT. I became his sort of assistant and helping him with this course, helping to kind of like post videos on WebCT courses so that people could watch them, the students could watch them and learn and figure out how all of that worked together. And at the time we were talking about like, oh, how do we get QuickTime videos to load really, really fast, depending on what kind of modem speed they're talking about. So this is like really sounds very dated, but I mean, this is all contributed to what we're doing right now with the School of SweetGeorgia, which is the same idea. We're trying to use video and trying to show people up close what we do in order to do some of the techniques that we do for learning how to weave or spin or dye yarn, how to knit. We can get really up close with video and share this with people no matter where they are.
That's amazing. We're going to come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you some more about that, but you wrote a book called Dyeing to Spin and Knit, Techniques and Tips to Make Custom Hand-Dyed Yarns. We have a picture of it here. And as I was reading about you and kind of doing some research, the thing that struck me as you talked about color was that it's much more personal for you. It seemed like it wasn't like, oh, this is a pretty color and it goes really well with this color and I like this one. And maybe I'm reading into it, but it just felt like you had a personal connection to color that was much deeper than just the visual. Am I way off base here or?
No, absolutely. I often say I believe that color has this transformational power. It's transformational. And I think that it's maybe sometimes hard for people to understand what that means, but I think that if I relate it to music, I feel really strongly like you might have a soundtrack for your life, right? Like, the music that surrounds you sets you into a certain mood. I can listen to certain music and then all of a sudden become like super, super down and super mellow, or I could be like really uplifted or whatever it is. And I feel like I get that same feeling from color. So if I'm surrounded by certain kinds of colors, I feel like my mood changes. I become a happier, lighter, more carefree person. There's other colors that kind of make me withdraw and make me feel really, introverted, or I want to cocoon. I want to be away from people, all of these kinds of things. I feel like the color has quite a physiological effect on you, and you may or may not realize it. And so that's part of the reason why I think like color is so important. And the colors that we surround ourselves with are so important, because it can change how you experience the world and how you are in the world.
Well, I can't remember the term now, but it's from a designer point of view, and I never took design classes, so I don't know. But it was something like it wasn't color family, but color that you said that the designers would say, these are the colors in the living room. So they come together as a group. What's the term I'm thinking of? Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, that's what I thought of. It's like a color family for you, that there's a connection there. Anyway, but the coolest thing when it comes to color is that you used to be a ballroom dancer, like competitive. Yeah. And you made your own dresses, which I think is so awesome. And we have a picture of that here. And this image shows the rich, rich colors that are involved in ballroom dancing. And I was curious, because your father is an artist. Do you think that artistry, being around all the use of color and the importance of color, had an impact on you, that's what drew you to these colors?
Absolutely. So I think my dad, he's a painter and he's a printmaker. And so I obviously have grown up watching him paint my whole life, and really influenced by how he applies color. So like where his landscapes are very much like a sort of a dry brush of color. And so it creates kind of like a very light glaze of color, and then different colors are applied on top. And so you can kind of see how the different layers of color mix and blend together to create new colors. So I think that part of it has come into my dyeing for sure. But with this whole ballroom phase that I had, this competitive ballroom phase, which lasted about 6 years while I was in university, I learned very early on that it was not really to your advantage to show up on the dance floor with like a black dress. You might look really elegant, but wearing a black dress or a white dress made it hard for you to get noticed when everybody else was wearing like very, very saturated, bright, jewel toned colors. So I think there was like a part of me that kind of that was unleashed in a way. Like I became not scared of this kind of color because we were going to wear it in order to be noticed on the dance floor. Otherwise you wouldn't get marked. Nobody would see you on the dance floor and you wouldn't get a mark. So I think that's where a lot of it also kind of came from. My eye was just like, oh, I'm okay with these kinds of colors. I'm okay with it being bright. I'm okay with it being saturated. I like it.
Okay, Mandy, you got to put that picture back up because I have a question. Is that you in the picture?
No.
That's not you in the orange in the lower right?
These are all photos of people that were dancing around the same time as I was in the community. These are all taken by a friend of ours, Nelson Wong, who was doing photography for the dance community at the time.
Well, they're amazing.
Yeah.
They're amazing images.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
As well as color. So you use a lot of color. It's very friendly to you. You're friendly to it. So is there a structure that you like to use that you think really enhances color in weaving, or a yarn size or type of yarn that you think really, again, enhances color, either in weaving or knitting or whatever?
Yeah, so I think that this might be funny or interesting to a lot of your community, because I'm somebody who came to weaving through knitting, and because we're making hand-dyed yarns very much for knitters, all of the yarns that I have access to are mostly knitting yarns, and they're mostly hand-dyed yarns. So I'm using those kinds of yarns in all of my weaving. And then before I started teaching for the School of SweetGeorgia, I really love plain weave. And I think I wove like 12 years straight of just plain weave, because to me, I was using plain weave and hand-dyed yarn and seeing how they interact. And so I just love that part of it. And you know, I've been inspired a lot by weavers like Sarah Lamb and also Talemi Mann, just like people who are using warp-faced weaving, as watching hand-painted color, hand-spun color, all of that kind of stuff shift and blend. I have a couple of little samples here. So things like this, you see? Yeah. So it's really simple. It's just hand painted skeins, hand painted warps, these kinds of things I love. And then also playing with these are all hand spun yarns that have like a bit of a gradient to them, depending on how they're spun. And I think this is actually my most favorite piece. This is a piece that is basically knit from, it's basically woven from a sock blank. It's actually 2 sock blanks. The sock blank is hand dyed and then used as warp and then used as weft in plain weave. But I just love the effect that is created through that. And so just really simple things. It doesn't have to be complicated. So yeah, that one. I was trying to find that sample at the studio and I couldn't find it.
Oh, you can just dive into that color. It is so rich.
Yeah, those are my colors.
Okay, am I making this up? Or weren't you told at one time, oh no, you can't put orange and pink together?
Yeah, I was told you can't put yellow and pink together.
Oh, okay. Well, you showed them wrong.
I like it anyway.
It's gorgeous together. It's gorgeous together.
Thank you.
As someone who is a knitter as well as a weaver, would you compare the knitting world to the weaving world? How are they similar? How are they different from your perspective?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, because like I came through knitting, I learned how to knit, and because I was going to the library and getting a lot of books, the books all had patterns in them. And then my first access to knitting knowledge was things like Vogue Knitting Magazine, right? So I would go borrow a whole bunch of Vogue Knitting Magazine, and then they all had patterns in them. So I think I came to knitting with the perspective that I find a pattern, figure out what yarn's needed, then I go get the yarn, and then I go make the thing. But when I came to weaving, weaving was more like, doesn't matter what your pattern is, doesn't matter what your yarn is. If you have this yarn, this is what we're going to do with it. And then you're looking at what is the end goal of what you're trying to create, and then figure out, okay, what weave structure are you going to use? How are you going to set it? How are you going to apply all these things? And applying a lot of knowledge to then creating your weaving. So you're working without necessarily a pattern. I'm working more from yarn, working more from intention, and then working from your own, like your own math. So I feel like I'm coming at it from 2 different angles, and that's where they're different. And so I find often, because I'm sort of in a community of a lot of people who knit and encouraging them to come over to weaving, I think that there's a missing sort of link there where everybody is looking for weaving patterns, like, well, what can I make? What should I make? Rather than coming from, oh, this is the yarn we have, this is what we want to do with it, and therefore this is the pattern that we're going to write. That makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing that to me, I always think of knitting, and well, there's a lot of difference, but just the color of weaving. Everybody thinks if it's fiber, then the color theory is all the same, and it's not, is it? Color in knitting does something different than color in weaving.
Yes, for sure. I mean, because when you're knitting with color, the color is going to stack on itself depending on how it's been dyed. In this case, for those socks, those are from a gradient sock blank that we dyed. And so basically the yarn is knitted into a piece of fabric first, and then it's dyed, and then we unravel the knitted fabric and then re-knit it into something new, which I find really fun and interesting. Yeah, so that's how those socks were made. So they were made from a double sock blank. And then on the left-hand side, that photo is a weaving that I did where I hand painted the warp before putting it on the loom. And that's all cotton yarn, completely different ways of dyeing, different kinds of dye, all sorts of things.
It's just beautiful. I'm just kind of sitting here staring at it. So how did you get into dyeing?
How did I get into dyeing? I actually got into dyeing because, well, I was knitting, and then I was curious about where yarn came from, so I learned how to spin. And at the time in Vancouver, there was one fiber store that sold wool, but all the wool that they sold was white. It was like raw white, and that was great. But I was spinning like so much. I would spin every day while I was learning how to spin. I was spinning every day, and I just wanted to see something different besides white. And so I thought, I need to learn how to dye. And I think around that time, there was a blog post on the Yarn Harlot website, and she was talking about how she was learning how to dye. And she had stuffed all of this fiber roving, wool roving into sections of pantyhose, into nylons, and made these big nylon snakes. And then she arranged the snakes into like a tray and then dyed them. And so I was so intrigued. I was like, oh, is that how you do it? Okay, I'll give this a try. So I tried. I used like the nylon pantyhose and put all this like undyed Corriedale fiber inside, and then dyed it with Kool-Aid to see how it all worked.
Oh,
And then after it was dry, I had to like peel off the nylons off the stockings, and then realized, I don't think I need the nylons next time. So I'm just going to keep trying. So then I just continued to dye without the nylons and just with fiber. And that's basically how I got started. I started because I wanted to spin color with my hand spinning. And then after dyeing fiber for a while, I realized, oh, I guess I could dye yarn too. And so that kind of came about.
what was the nylons for?
I think it's to hold the fiber together so that it didn't all float away in the dye pot.
Okay.
But if you're not using that much water, then it's really not that much of a concern. So,
Yes.
so it's fine. I didn't.
Did you accidentally felt anything while you were doing this?
Oh, I have felted many things in learning how to dye. At one point in time, I put all this Corriedale fiber into a crock pot because I learned, oh, you can heat up your dye pot in a crock pot. But I didn't know how long to put it in for because nobody on the internet had written how much time to put it in for. So I think I put it on for like 4 hours. And then when it came out, it was all completely felted. But I still spun it, which I probably shouldn't have because it was hard to spin.
But you don't give up. I mean, some people would say, oh, this is it. I'm just done. I hate to say it. Sometimes I do that. Pray way too much, but you don't. It's like, okay, well, let's try something different this time. That's amazing.
Thanks.
Is
Yeah,
that
I actually really liked the colors that came out of that crock pot dyeing situation. So I was like, oh, I like it, but maybe I'll do it differently next time.
well, there's so much to know about you. As I was researching and reading and listening to your blogs, and if you all have not listened to Sweet Georgia's podcast, you have missed out a lot. You've got to listen to them. They're amazing. But there's just so much. You're another one that we need 2 or 3 hours to get through everything. So I'm going to do the infamous 10 things that people will want to know about you. So we're just kind of going to go through these as quickly as we can. We'll see. Okay, so if for you to relax, you like to
Spin.
really spin?
Yeah, spin.
I've heard that a lot. That's kind
Yeah.
of like Zen-like kind of.
It's very Zen-like, and just sit in the evenings and I can spin and it's quiet. It's not a really loud thing. I spin, and yeah, it's very relaxing.
Doesn't matter what you spin?
No, I'm not really particularly fussy. I have like a bit of a default. So I have a default weight yarn that I make, and I make these singles, I ply them, and then I am cranking them in my circular sock knitting machine right now, or I'm weaving with them. But I just like making this one kind of yarn. I'm not really fussy about making a whole bunch of different kinds of yarn or doing anything like that right now. I just like doing it because it's relaxing and fun.
I've kind of stepped into the second question already, which is my go-to yarn is
Right now, it's this yarn. This top yarn, this is the hand spun yarn that I made with those like default Zen-like spinning things. This is a 3-ply yarn that is like a fractal yarn. I love it. It's a BFL wool, blue face Leicester wool, and silk blended together. And then the rest of the sweater is also blue face Leicester and silk. And then it's held together with one strand of what we call silk mist, which is a silk mohair fuzzy yarn. And I love this combination right now for like everything.
hey, All right, spindle, wheel, or e-spinner?
Wheel.
What kind of wheel?
I'm spinning on a Lendrum Saxony. It's a secondhand Lendrum Saxony that it was my fairy tale dream wheel that I'd wanted for like years and years and years and years. And I think I put it out into the universe, said, this is what I want. And then somebody told me when a listing became available. I was like, that's the one.
Singles or plied?
Plied.
Okay. Most interesting fiber you've ever worked with?
Probably silk in all forms. It's just, yeah.
Why?
It's nice. Blended, it's interesting straight. It's interesting in all the different forms that it can come in. It has texture. It can be noily and cottony and bumpy, or it can be like silky and shiny and smooth. It can be everything. And so I love it. It's just, it does all things.
That is so true, because somebody will say, oh, that's silk. And it's like, no, that can't be silk. I'm really starting to expand my awareness of silk. It can be just two ends of the extreme. All right. I wish I could have taken a class from.
I couldn't, I can't pin it down to just one person. There's so many.
Give me a couple.
Just one. I would say I have been wanting to take a class from Catherine Weber at Blazing Shuttles for forever. And I know she teaches at Convergence, and I'm always like stalking the Convergence events registration, and her class sells out immediately. And yeah, so that is right now my number one choice.
Well, you and I will have to talk, because I'm her favorite student.
Oh, yay.
That's a long story. I hope she's watching, because I know she's rolling her eyes going, no, you're not, Kathy. But yeah, I can see that. You're such a color person. She's a color person, and you're a lot alike. Your energy levels are similar. And yeah, you need to do that.
Yeah, I do. I need to.
You need to go to her place. It's wonderful in North Carolina. It's such a cute shop. And
it's on my wish list.
Okay.
Someday.
All right. I am very proud of making.
I'm very proud of making, I think right now I'm very proud of making the school. That is my thing. And I'm very proud because I'm excited to see everyone else making things from things that they've learned there. So that's, I think, what I'm most excited about right now. So like I can make projects for myself, and like I'm proud of my sweater and I love this and all this stuff, but it's really, really, really satisfying when I get feedback from somebody else who's made their very first yarn, or woven their very first dish towel, or dyed their first skein yarn. Like all of that stuff is really, really exciting. And I don't know, I find it very thrilling. So that's what I'm proud of right now.
Which is more important, process or product?
I think process. Because creativity is iterative anyways. So I kind of like, you get to the end product, but that's where I'm like, oh, well, what could we do differently next time? What could we change? What could we improve? And so I'm willing to make the same thing over again, because I want to see how it can be evolved or improved. So for me, like the thing is almost an intermediate step to learning what could be done differently or better next time. So that's why.
Which would you rather have, a good movie, a good book, or a good meal?
A good meal.
I started putting in something about yarn. I thought, no, that's in a class unto itself. I can't wait to hear this. If you designed a crest, like a family crest or a shield, it's a fiber crest or shield, not a family, fiber, what would be on it?
I always think about like, yeah, for sure, a shuttle, for sure. And I always think about like, if I were to get a tattoo, I maybe would get a shuttle as a tattoo. But anyways, yeah, I would think about a shuttle. But the other thing I would think of, because people put like animals on their fiber crests and things like that. And I kind of would put a phoenix on there for that same reason, that like things are iterative. It's like not the end, and then what gets created out of the thing that didn't work, what's next, that sort of thing.
I sometimes ask guests what would they be doing if they could do anything, but girl, you've done so much. I don't know if there's much left. I mean, you were first of, you did pharmacy first, the ballroom dancing, you were a graphic designer. There's just so much you've done everywhere. There's more that we haven't gotten into. So what of those things do you think have influenced where you are now and how?
I think they all have. I
Mhm.
think that when I was going through university, I was really grumpy about having picked pharmacy because I really felt like I was in the wrong place. I had chosen the wrong thing. I should have gone to either art school, I should have gone to business school, I should have gone to comp sci, I should have literally done anything else. And I was very sort of resentful of that choice. And then I lived with it for a long time and I was quite angry about that. But now looking back, I see how important it was to have
Mhm.
had that experience and all the things that it provided. And so I kind of like look at everything. Nothing is ever a mistake. Everything always gets worked up into the next thing. So I think that if I hadn't had the ballroom dancing, then I definitely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now too. And if I hadn't done the design, the graphic design work, then I also probably wouldn't be doing this now. So yeah, it's funny.
Um, you've stated that while you were working as a graphic designer, that the digital made you yearn for the textile and the tactile. Um, what was the beginning of your idea? Was that the beginning of you saying, I'm going to do a fiber business? I'm sick of not having textiles, or was there more to it than that?
Mm, yeah, I think that like as a graphic designer, a lot of my work was it was all digital. It was all
Right.
a lot of it was like a lot of my work was email and a lot of it was, deciding on colors together, deciding on typefaces and things like that. And I felt like I needed something that was more tangibly creative where I could move something and see something happen there was a cause and effect and not just like sending emails back and forth. And so that's where I started to really enjoy dyeing. So dyeing, if I put color on, I could see the effect. I could see what would happen with it. And so I really got lost in that whole world. I loved, loved, loved that. Um, but I think that in terms of like doing it as a business, it was because I had run out of room in my house for all of the yarn that I was dyeing. I was just you can get so obsessed with making something because you love it and then not realize that, oh, I have all of this stuff. What am I going to do with it? I can only knit so fast. I really don't knit very fast at all. And so yeah, wanting to somehow send it out into the world so that I could continue to do it. So that was one of the things. But I felt like the thing that made me think that I could do this as a business was um a Etsy had started at that same time. So when I
Oh,
started like the yarn business in 2005, that was, I believe, the year that Etsy also launched. So there was a venue for being able to do that in a really kind of easy way. But I'd already always had a bit of this kind of entrepreneur feeling before. So I started a sewing business when I was 16. I had started, doing alterations for people, sewing clothes for people. And then when I was going through my ballroom phase, I started sewing ball gowns for people for a costume shop. I did a lot of sewing for a costume company. And yeah, and then I started the graphic design business that I had when I was about 21. So it was like, oh, I'll just start another business.
it just reminds me of, like, all these little creeks that turn into rivers and becomes this big river. All that converged for you,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
taking you to where you are now, which I want to ask you more about that in a minute. But my last question is, what do you wish people would ask you when you get interviewed? Because you've been interviewed a lot. What do you wish people would ask? What should I ask you?
I guess the question that I feel like maybe people don't ask because they don't really know what it is, but like, is this idea of being multi-craftual and why is it important and why is it necessary? I feel like um, very often, um, yeah, it's hard to explain. It's like if you're talking to knitters and knitters who knit, then you can talk about knitting. And if you're talking to spinners who spin, then you can talk about spinning. But I feel like for me, I want to talk about all of the different things. And I want to talk about how the thing that you spun can become the thing that you knit. And then, you could take that fabric and then maybe you crank it into a tube and then you weave it like in a macrame technique and make it into a giant wall hanging. Like all of that stuff, I find really, really fascinating and interesting. And I want to be able to share that with everyone and encourage people to discover all of the different aspects of the fiber arts and different crafts that can be explored. So if you're a knitter and you've only ever knit, I really want to encourage knitters to start spinning, to try spinning for the very, very first time. And if somebody is a spinner and they're making tons and tons of yarn, or you're dyeing and you're making tons and tons of yarn, then my encouragement, which is the same encouragement I got from my weaving teacher, was maybe take all that yarn and learn how to weave now. And to discover all of the joy of being able to transfer your knowledge between all of these different craft silos.
Well, what's next for you?
What is next, imminently next, is that we are actually moving our studio before the end of this year. So there's kind of like a couple of things that we're doing. So we're doing kind of like a physical refresh and revitalization, which is like we are moving our studio from one part of Vancouver to another part, which is like 5 minutes away, but we're moving our studio space.
So it's moving. Oh my gosh, packing. Oh,
packing. We have to set up a new dye studio. We have to set up a new front store. We have, for the past 3 years, been using our current space to film all of our courses for the School of SweetGeorgia. So in the new space, we have to set up a new filming area. So that's like the physical thing that we're doing in December. So it's happening very soon. And then on like sort of the digital side of things, I'm also doing kind of like a complete refresh, restoration of a lot of the content that we've been making, because like I have been writing about all of these different crafts and these different techniques since 2004. So that is going to be 20 years next year, which seems crazy. It's crazy because I feel always like I just started, but we've been doing this for 20 years now, and we've written almost 1,700 blog posts. We've made like 350 videos for YouTube. We've published 100 courses on the school website. And so I am looking at all of this content and looking at how can we make this better? How can we make this more useful? How can we make this more updated? How can we create content that people are interested in? So all of that kind of stuff is also happening. And then I am also, I'm going to be launching a class that's going to be talking about how to weave blocks for the School of SweetGeorgia in the new year. But after I finish with making that, I really want to do like a ton more of my own weaving and exploration, and mostly like playing with hand-dyed color and just very simple weave structures, just playing with all of that kind of stuff and seeing where that goes. Yeah, so lots of things on the horizon.
You're a busy, busy woman. Okay, we have some questions. Let's start seeing what people are asking here. What weft yarns and colors do best with your dyed yarns?
What weft yarns? I really, really love the cash silk lace yarn. It's a cashmere and silk blend. It's very, very fine. It's a lace weight yarn, and it works really, really well as a weft yarn. Soft and silky. I like that one. Silk mohair, if you like a little bit of fuzz, that also is a nice one. And otherwise, we have another yarn. It's called merino silk lace, which is merino and lace blend. Merino and silk blend in a lace weight yarn, and that also works up really, really nice.
I knew this was coming. Terry Shoemaker wants to know, could you stand up so we can see the rest of your sweater? Oh, it's cute.
Yeah, this is Caitlin Hunter, her design. It's called Alpine Bloom.
And you dyed the wool?
Yes, so this yarn down here for the body, this is our BFL and silk fine yarn in a color called Gather. And then the top part is hand spun yarn that I made out of a braid called Salted Caramel. And it's also blue face.
Looking at it, it just looks like the top is lacier and you can kind of see through it. I didn't realize it's two different colors.
Yeah, it's color work.
Ah, brilliant.
Color work knitting. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right. If this is from Fazia. Hi, Fazia. If you had a chance to spend a week learning some new technique related to spinning, weaving, or dyeing, what would it be?
I actually, if I had a week, I really, really, really want to go visit Margot Selby's studio in the UK. And I understand that she teaches workshops there. And that's where I'd want to go to spend
I
a week
like your bucket
learning
list.
like literally anything from Margot Selby.
I hope she's watching. Oh, this is a good question. It's a great story. I almost asked you about it. Sweet Georgia, who was or is Georgia?
It's not. We have people call the studio and ask for Georgia, or they asked before if we have a dog named Georgia, and we actually don't. Georgia is there's Georgia Street in Vancouver, and it leads sort of from the city. Georgia Street is the street that you take that leads you into the mountains. So it will take you up to basically the North Shore and Whistler and everything from Vancouver. And so long time ago, I thought when I was baking bread, I thought, oh, I'd open a business running a bakery, and I wanted to call it Sweet Georgia.
Well, that's how I caught what caught my eye is because I live in Georgia. And I was like, oh, she's from Georgia. This is great. Yeah. And I was like, well, she's a little north of Georgia. So yes. Kathy Wilcox wants to know how many shafts are on your loom.
The one behind me has 8 shafts.
Okay. Yes, somebody's
only use 4.
Huh?
But I only use 4.
There you go. Somebody replied, excuse me. There's 8, but capable of 12.
Yes. You can add more shafts, but this one came with 8.
Bernadette wants to know, do you still ballroom dance? Perhaps
not anymore. Fun? No.
I thought she was going to ask you to demonstrate for a second.
No.
This is from Carrie Gordon. Thank you, Felicia. What do you use for your color inspiration? Photographs, landscapes? Love your colors. Me too, Carrie. Good question.
Not so much photographs, actually. A lot of it comes from this sort of like feeling that I want to have. So, like a lot of the colors, like that faux ikat warp sort of scarf that you showed earlier, that photo of like lying on the chair. A lot of those colors are really like, they're my colors. I feel like those are the colors that you would see inside like a flame.
Oh, thank you.
These kinds of colors. They just like they give me either a feeling of like of energy or of warmth or of like kind of feeling like a fire starter, like a lot of those kinds of things. I think that that's where a lot of my color comes from. I like that.
Maybe someone has asked this, the multi-craftual, which I think is an incredible name. Everybody's loving that. Touches on it. Artists and non-artists have fear that challenges them. It seems crazy, but do you help your students with it? I think weavers generate fear in non-weavers. It's a lot of focus. Thank you for hosting.
For sure. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is encourage people to just try. I think that when we take the focus off of the finished product and we focus more on sort of like learning to be critical, not in a mean way, but like learning to be observant of your own work and to kind of look at, oh, what could I do differently? What could I change the next time? That kind of self-questioning, I think, is something that we're trying to encourage everybody to do at the school. And hopefully that perspective allows you to learn less judgment from yourself and less fear, because you're not so worried about making mistakes. It's more about, what can I do differently next time?
Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently when you started Sweet Georgia? Also, as a craftual maker, what do you feel is the hardest part? I know for me, it's just finding the time for it all.
Absolutely. So, I mean, like if I did anything differently from the very beginning, if anybody is starting a business in fiber business or any kind of business whatsoever, the very first thing that I would encourage you to do would be to work with an accountant that you really like and enjoy. Because one of the things that I learned about when you have a hand-dyed yarn business is this is not really necessarily an art business. You have it. I learned this from John Fluvog, who made shoes. He says, I have an inventory business. Your business has to do with like the manufacturing of finished goods from raw materials, and kind of like accounting for how much material do you have, how much time did it take you to make it, how much material do you have at the end of the day, how much finished goods do you have, like understanding all that aspect of it, the business side of it, I think is really, really key. And that's what I would encourage anybody to do if they're thinking about starting a business in this side of things. But the other question about being a multi-craft maker, and the hardest part of that, I think besides the time, I think is the focus. Is being able to focus on one thing at a time. And so that's where absolutely, like, I struggle with this too. I want to make all the things, and I have so many ideas, and inspired by so many people and so many things, and so many different things that I want to try. But I kind of have to like reel myself in and say, hey, we only have so much time. And really, like, I have very limited time because, we're a very busy family, and we busy with activities and stuff like that. So I have very limited time. So I have to prioritize which are the things that I'm going to focus on at this time. So right now for me, I'm like, I'll spin in the evenings. And then when I have enough yarn, then I crank some socks, or maybe I knit a sweater. I take this, it's portable and I can take my sweater anywhere. But some things have to be done in a stationary spot. Like if you're going to weave, you're going to be here. If you're going to be cranking, you're going to be here. And if you're going to be spinning, you're going to be sitting at your wheel. So a lot of the things that I do are not necessarily portable. So I have to think about, like, how am I going to spend all that time? And it doesn't mean that I'm never going to do all of the things. I'm just not going to do them all at the same time.
Oh, this is a good question, because you mentioned this earlier when we were talking. So I loved your Advent weave along. Please do another for weaving on a 4-shaft loom. Now, what is that?
So for the past number of years, we have at SweetGeorgia, we made like an Advent kit. So basically the idea is that you would receive this during the holidays, and then December 1st, you can start to open boxes. And in each box, or in each little package, there's like a tiny little bit of yarn. And for the knitters or the crocheters, they would open up the box and they would have a little instruction in it. And that day you cast on 3 stitches, and then you knit with this color. And then the next day you open the second box and it's another color yarn. And then you add that to your project and all this kind of stuff. And so then by the end of the month, you would have a finished project that would have maybe 20 or 24 different colors in it. And so one year we made a weaving option where we gave everybody the yarn, and then they warped their loom with the stripe pattern, which was what actually I think slide number 2 that you guys showed in this presentation, the very beginning. So making a stripe pattern. And then every day the weavers would get a different set of instructions for what weave pattern to weave that day. So it was like a little bit of a color and weave. I think there was a little bit of twill in there, but yeah, that is basically the warp that was set up for that weaving Advent project. It was really, really, really fun to make.
It sounds like so much fun.
Yeah.
But this isn't the year for it, is it?
Not this year, just because we're going to be moving. And so we didn't have sort of bandwidth to make this Advent kit for this year. But I mean, this is something that was super fun to do, and we would love to do that again if we ever have time.
Thank you, Doreen, for that question, because it sounds wonderful. I'm going to keep my ears and eyes open for that. Jenny wants to know, have you ever done ice dyeing?
I have not. But funny, my daughter actually did ice dyeing this summer. We hosted a kids fiber arts camp at SweetGeorgia, like a local fiber arts camp. So like kids that were about 7 or 8 years old up till about 10 or 12 years old, they could come in the summer for 1 week, and every day they did a little bit of a different craft. And so we had one of our SOS instructors, Katrina Stewart. She came and helped these kids. And one of the days they made an ice dyed bag. And then the next day they like felted some stuff, and then they were able to felt the motif onto the bag, all this kind of stuff. So my daughter has done ice dyeing, but I've never done it. But it looks amazing and looks super fun. And yeah, I would love to be able to have some time to try.
Well, you'll be glad to know that I've done ice dyeing once, and it was with Catherine Weber.
Ah,
there you go. There you go. I'm curious, and some other people have asked about that. What was the catalyst to start a school, and what was some of the struggles that you had to do in that?
Oh, absolutely. So basically in 2017 is when I sort of announced that I wanted to try and start this school. And
Mhm.
the idea behind that was that my daughter, she was born in 2016, and I had a son who's born in 2013. And so I had these two young kids at home. And at the same time, I had just published that book, Dying to Spin and Knit with Interweave. And I was getting um, requests to basically go out and teach and to travel and to teach. And that's normally what people do. You write a book and then you go out and you teach the things that come out of your book. And I could not and did not really want to leave my family. I mean, they're really young and I wasn't going to go out and teach. I did try and it was really hard. I even brought my daughter with me on a teaching trip and it was just hard. And
Yeah.
so I thought, there's got to be a different way to do this. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And so that's when I started the school. It was basically to create a way for me to get the information out to everyone without having to travel, but also providing other people with the opportunity to learn without having to travel, so that, then they could all join in and be able to watch the videos from no matter where they are.
Well, we thank you for that. Is there going to be a big change in the class in the coming months or years?
Oh, we have like 100 different classes and we're still planning more classes for next year.
Now, do
So
you teach them all, or do you bring in people?
no, we bring in instructors for many of the different topics. So I teach a number of the classes and I teach spinning and I've taught some knitting. I teach color theory. I teach some weaving classes, but we also have Laura Fry, who's a master weaver here in Canada.
Ooh, yeah.
She has taught many of our classes on the school, and we have a new one coming out very shortly where Laura's teaching sectional warping, which is great because there's not a ton of published information about sectional warping. So really excited for things like that. But Laura teaches weaving. We have a number of instructors who teach spinning. We have tapestry weaving instructor. Charlotte at our studio, she teaches all the crochet classes. So we have like a lot of things coming still.
What do your kids think of what you do? I
I
mean,
think
you're not
that
the typical mom at the OPTA meeting. You're not the typical mom.
I think they like it. I mean, they both have done, various bits and pieces of these different crafts. I taught them how to weave using a little, like a little frame loom when they were kids. Both my kids have learned how to crochet a bit, knit a bit. We always make their Halloween costumes every year, except for this year. This year was busy, but last year, yeah, we always make their Halloween costumes. So I hope to have instilled that same sort of impression that you can make anything. You can make anything you want, anything that's in your imagination. You can find a way to make it, and you don't necessarily have to buy it, or like you can create this. Yeah, and they've asked me like, can I come work for you in a summer job sometime? So yeah.
Well, that's good. At least they're not like screaming away, like, I don't want anything to do with this.
No, my son, he's come for 2 summers already, and he'll come during summer vacation, and he'll help me with the filming for a couple.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so
Oh,
that's a
that's
fun experience I hope for him to have.
I read that when you first started dyeing, that you started with, and I may be remembering this wrong, but like a few skeins, and then they were sewed immediately. Like they really sewed quickly after
Yeah, I
you.
think like the first skein sold within like a couple of hours, and then the 3 skeins were gone, and then I was like, oh, what do I do now? Put more yarn on, I guess. And then it was like, great, I can make more yarn now.
Well, as someone who has dyed and is terrified to even weave it because of all the blood, sweat, and tears I put into it, is it hard for you to send out into the world your work?
No. No.
Even in the beginning, it was like, take off.
No, because it gives you room to like do more. And I think like even in this attic, I'm still surrounded by skeins that I have saved over the past 20 years. And I feel a little bit like holding on to that is like holding on to energy that gets blocked. Like you need to let it out, and then more will come. They say with yarn, like there's always more where that came from. So you have to send it out, make something with it. And then there's always more. There's always going to be more.
Somebody, when you said attic, somebody was asking, is this your studio or your house, or
This is my attic in my house.
is that where you weave?
Yes. So I have a couple of looms up here. I have a loom in my dining room, and then I have looms at the studio space where we work at SweetGeorgia. Yeah.
How many looms do you have?
Too many. I think it's 5 floor looms right now, and then a whole bunch of like table looms and rigid heddle looms and things like that.
Now you're not thinking about transitioning to in person, come in and weave kind of thing. Yours is video online out into the world, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. We don't have a ton of space to host like full-on in-person weaving classes here in Vancouver. So I feel like the benefit is still to be able to provide it online and have more people be able to access that. But we try to get up really, really close with the camera so that people can see what's going on.
Well, again, if I'm a podcast addict, I love podcasts. I love it because when I'm doing things like running or weaving or where I can't watch anything, it's wonderful to just listen, and they're so well done. I encourage you all to check those out. And and somebody just posted that your classes are awesome. Be sure you check those out too. And thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you being here, Felicia.
Thank you so much, Kathy. This was really fun. Thank you.
And I'm so proud of myself. I didn't call you Georgia. I've gotten into that nasty habit. Again, if you are interested in learning more about Felicia Lo and what she does, y'all, you have to go to her website. Look at all the stuff on there. She is incredibly generous with her information and teaching. And again, the podcasts are incredible. There's the blog, lots on her website. Check out her school. You'll get more information there too. Thank you, Felicia. We loved having you here today.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you.
And we want to thank our sponsor and the Rebecca Abear, your statement that you added with your sponsorship is perfect, and it's perfect today, celebrating the joy that those who teach fiber artistry bring to the world. And Felicia does bring joy to the world with her teaching and her beautiful color. So thank you, Rebecca. We appreciate you sponsoring Textiles and Tea today. If you would like to sponsor Textiles and Tea or your guild or your business, you can go to the website at weavespindye.org and you can sign up. Please go to the Textiles and Tea section and sign up there. We want to make sure we get you hooked up to the right thing. We're excited that we've got something to do this summer. Thinking about what you're going to do the next 12 months, you're going to get ready for Convergence. It is in July in Wichita, July 11th through the 17th, and there is so much to do. We've got classes, we've got 90-minute sessions, 3-day workshops. There's the runway fashion show, and nobody has that except Convergence. And if you talk to people who've been before, it's the highlight of the week. It is so much fun to see all those clothes walking down the runway. And you can still enter that, by the way. And that is a real thrill to see what you've made on a model walking down the runway. There's the marketplace. We have tours, exhibits. There's so much to see. Registration is open. So jump in there. And we've got a new thing this year that has just been wonderful, which is we have the session spotlights. The leaders come on, they talk about their classes, all of their classes, and they tell you about what you can expect, what's involved. You can make a decision if it's too difficult, if it's exactly what you want to try. It's wonderful. And I have to confess that some of these classes, I'd be like, yeah, not my thing. And then I listen to what they say and it's like, I think I'd like to try that. And a hint, if you are making the schedule for your guilds for workshops or programs, watch these videos. They'll give you great ideas of people that you might want to bring to your guild to come and teach or give a talk. It's fascinating. They're all recorded. You can watch them whenever you want. They're on our Facebook page and you can see them there. We've got 2 different hotels that you can stay at now. We've got the Fairfield and the Drury. The Fairfield is just across the parking lot. Drury is on the other end of the convention center. The Drury is kind of neat looking inside. You should check it out. It's kind of old, dark wood, great place. And the Fairfield, well, we all know Fairfield's a wonderful place to stay, and it's pretty close. So make your reservations so we can get you at one of those hotels. We would love to have you stay. It's always nice when we're all staying at the same hotel, especially like at the Fairfield. They have that area where you have breakfast. It's a great place to meet all of the other weavers, do a little spin out. It's a great place. If you've donated to HGA in the past, I want to say thank you. Donating to HGA and your memberships help pay for these things. The donations help pay for things like Textiles and Tea, Careers in Textiles, Spinning and Weaving Week. So we thank you so much when you make a donation. If you would like to donate or join, or both, you can do so at weavespindye.org. Everything's online and you can do all of that there. But thank you again to everyone. Next week, we've got a big name next week. Madeline Vanderhoot's going to join us. And I'm so excited because first time I asked her, she said, no way, she wasn't going to do it. But she has decided she's going to join us. So next week, Madeline Vanderhoot, we're so excited. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy tea.